Queen Nefertari, standing a colossal 33 feet tall. And if you look very carefully, you'll see she's just that little bit taller than her famous husband Ramses II because of the tall feather crown she's wearing.
Basically, history has been lying to you about the woman buried next to Ramses the Great. Everyone is obsessed with the kings, but Nefertari was the one writing the letters that saved the empire from total destruction.
We are in Queen Nefertari's Egypt. Of Ramses II's 8 wives, Nefertari was his most favorite, the one for whom the sun shined.
After decades of searching, archaeologists have finally identified her physical body, and it proves she was treated like a god while she was still breathing. This discovery is hands down the most important update to Egyptian history in a century. You will see how one woman changed the destiny of the Nile and why her husband was actually terrified of losing her brilliance. Broken limbs reveal secrets. Most scholars used to think the Valley of the Queens was just a boring version of the Valley of the Kings. They thought it was a place for secondary people who did not really change history. This bias actually blinded them for a very long time. While they were busy digging up gold for pharaohs, they missed the most important artistic and political clues hidden in the smaller tombs. But here is the catch. That neglect is exactly what helped one of the most amazing tombs ever found stay safe from the prying eyes of the modern world for so long. In 1903, a man named Ernesto Schiaparelli got permission to dig in this quiet valley. He was not like the other treasure hunters who just wanted gold. He was a scientist who wanted the truth. During his second trip in 1904, his workers found a set of steps. These were not just any steps. They were 5 feet wide and carved right into the solid rock. As they cleared away the dirt, they saw a ramp meant for sliding a heavy stone coffin down into the dark. That was the first sign that someone very important was waiting down there. When they reached the door, they saw the name Nefertari Meritmut. Even though the tomb had been robbed in ancient times, the walls were still screaming with color. The ceiling was painted a deep blue and covered in thousands of 5-pointed stars. It looked like the night sky on the clearest night you can imagine. But the most haunting part was what the robbers left behind. In a pile of trash and broken stone, Schiaparelli found a pair of mummified legs. They were just fragments of thigh bones and a kneecap wrapped in very expensive linen. For over 80 years, these legs sat in a museum in Italy, while everyone wondered if they really belonged to the Queen. It was not until recently that a team of international experts decided to solve the mystery for good. They used a process called anthropometric reconstruction to look at the bones. This is basically a fancy way of saying they measured every tiny curve of the bone to see how tall and strong the person was. They found out this woman stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall. That might not sound like much today, but back then, it made her taller than 84% of all the women in Egypt. She was literally a giant among her people. The scientists also found signs of a condition where the arteries get thick, which usually happens to people as they get older. This matched perfectly with the age Nefertari was supposed to be when she passed away. Then they looked at the sandals found with the legs. They were made of palm fiber and were very high quality. They were the equivalent of a modern size 9 or 10, which fit the height of the bones perfectly. The way she was wrapped was also a huge clue. The linen was so fine that it could only have been used for someone at the very top of the social ladder. Everything pointed to one conclusion. These were the legs of the most powerful woman of the 19th dynasty. She was not just a painting anymore. She was a human being who walked the halls of the palace and felt the sun on her skin. Identifying her remains was like putting the final piece into a giant puzzle that had been broken for 3,000 years. It proved that the stories about her were not just fairy tales. She was a real, living force that Ramses could not live without. Now that we knew who she was, we had to figure out how she got so much power. Nefertari was not just a wife, but a leader who held the entire empire together with her mind. Pharaoh's true partner. The way people usually talk about ancient queens makes them sound like they were just there to look good at parties. But that is putting it lightly. Nefertari was actually one of the most educated people in the entire country. We know this because she is one of the only queens ever shown as a scribe. In ancient Egypt, being able to read and write was like having a superpower. Only about 1% of the population could do it. It gave her access to the secret records of the state and the holy books of the priests. She was not sitting in a room waiting for her husband to tell her what to do. She was likely helping him write the laws of the land. The crazy part is that she did not even come from a royal family. Most queens were the daughters of kings, but Nefertari's family tree is a total blank. Some people think she was a commoner who was so smart and beautiful that she forced her way into the palace. Others think she might have been related to an older family that lost power. Either way, she did not have a fancy title to help her. She had to earn it. By the time she was 13 years old, she was already moving through the court with a level of grace that made everyone else look like amateurs. Ramses II was a man with a massive ego. He built statues of himself that were over 60 feet tall and told everyone he was a god. But when it came to Nefertari, he was different. He called her the mistress of the whole world. He also had another wife named Nefret. Now, Nefret was the one who gave him the sons who would eventually take over the throne. She was the dynastic wife. But Nefertari was the political wife. She was the one he took to meetings and the one he trusted to talk to the enemies of Egypt. We have found letters that Nefertari wrote to the queen of the Hittites. The Hittites were the biggest rivals Egypt had. They had been fighting for years in a war that seemed like it would never end. While the men were out in the dirt trying to eliminate each other, Nefertari was writing letters of peace. She sent gifts of gold and expensive clothes to the Hittite queen and called her sister. This kind of soft power is what eventually led to the first peace treaty ever recorded in history. She did not need an army to change the world. She just needed a pen and a plan. In the palace, she was like a machine that never stopped working. She had to manage the religious festivals and make sure the gods were happy, so the Nile would flood and feed the people. If the river did not flood, people would starve, and the pharaoh would lose his job. Nefertari was the bridge between the human world and the divine world. She was often linked to the goddess Hathor, who was the goddess of love and music. People believed that as long as Nefertari was happy, Egypt would be safe. That is a huge amount of pressure for one woman to carry. What most people do not realize is that her influence did not stop when she left the room. She was so respected that she even had her own staff of officials who reported only to her. She was basically running her own version of the government inside the palace. This gave her a level of independence that was almost unheard of for a woman back then. She was not just a partner, she was a co-ruler. Ramses knew that without her, his reign would not be nearly as successful. He relied on her brain just as much as he relied on his own sword. This partnership was built on a vision of a unified and glorious Egypt that would last forever. But her most impressive secrets were not hidden in letters or laws. They were painted on the walls of her final resting place. Tomb of Wonders. When archaeologists first walked into Nefertari's tomb, they felt like they had stepped into another dimension. It is hands down the most beautiful burial site ever found on the planet. Most tombs were built to be dark and scary to keep people away, but hers was built to be a masterpiece of light and color. The walls are covered in plaster that was smoothed out like glass and then painted with the most expensive colors available 3,000 years ago. They used real gold, bright red made from minerals, and a special blue that scientists still study today. The crazy part is that the tomb acts like a giant map for her soul. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end. It was just a very difficult obstacle course. You had to pass through gates guarded by monsters and answer riddles from gods. Nefertari's tomb has the answers to those riddles written right on the walls. It is like she brought a cheat sheet with her to the afterlife. She is shown standing in front of the god of wisdom, Thoth, and telling him that she is a scribe. She is basically telling the gods that she is one of them, and they need to let her through. One of the coolest parts of the tomb is a wall that shows her playing a game called Senet. It looks a little bit like chess or checkers, but it was not just a game for fun. It was a symbol of strategy and the soul's journey. By showing her playing this game, the artists were telling everyone that she was a strategic genius who could outsmart death itself. She is sitting in a beautiful chair, looking very calm, while she moves her pieces across the board. It is a very human moment in a place that is supposed to be all about the gods. The burial chamber itself is a huge room with 4 massive pillars. The Egyptians called it the Golden Hall. This was where the actual transformation was supposed to happen. They believed her body would turn into a spiritual being that could fly out of the tomb and watch over the country. The ceiling here is also covered in stars, making the room feel like it is floating in space. Every inch of the 97 square feet of space is covered in detail. There is not a single blank spot. It is the ultimate display of wealth and devotion. But there is a darker side to this beauty. Because the tomb is so famous, it has been in danger for a long time. When people breathe inside the tomb, the moisture from their breath starts to destroy the paint. For decades, the tomb had to be closed to the public because the walls were literally falling apart. Scientists had to spend 6 years cleaning every single inch of the walls with tiny tools to save the art. It was a race against time to make sure this mystery woman's legacy did not turn into a pile of dust. Today, if you want to go inside, you have to pay a lot of money and follow very strict rules. It is one of the most protected sites in the world. This is because we have realized that the tomb is not just a grave. It is a library of ancient history. It tells us what the people believed, what they wore, and what they valued. Nefertari is the star of the show in every single scene. She is never shown as a victim or someone who is afraid. She is always standing tall and looking the gods right in the eye. The level of detail in her tomb proves that Ramses wanted her to have the best possible life in the next world. He did not just want her to be remembered. He wanted her to be eternal. This devotion led him to do something that shocked the entire priesthood and changed the mountains of Egypt forever. History rewritten forever. If you travel deep into the south of Egypt, past the bustling markets of Luxor and into the scorching silence of the Nubian desert, you will find a place called Abu Simbel. It is a massive temple carved right into the heart of a mountain. Most pharaohs built their temples out of massive blocks of stone hauled across the desert, but Ramses II wanted something that could never be torn down, stolen, or weathered away by time. He had his workers cut through the solid rock to create statues of himself that are over 60 feet tall. They are so big that they look like they were built by giants, and for centuries, locals whispered that perhaps they actually were. But right next to his main temple, there is a second, slightly smaller one. And that is where things get really interesting, leading us down a rabbit hole of ancient secrets and cosmic anomalies. This second temple was dedicated to Nefertari and the goddess Hathor. In ancient Egypt, there were very strict rules about how you could show people in art and architecture. The king was always supposed to be the biggest person in the room, a literal mountain of a man compared to everyone else. His wives and children were usually shown as tiny figures that only reached his knees, looking more like decorative dolls than human beings. It was a visual way of saying he was the boss of everyone, the bridge between the gods and the mortals. But at Abu Simbel, Ramses broke every rule in the book. The statues of Nefertari on the front of her temple are 33 feet tall. They are exactly the same height as the statues of Ramses standing right next to them. The priests at the time must have been absolutely losing their minds. To them, this wasn't just a sweet gesture. It was a total scandal. It was like saying a human woman was equal to a living god. Some wilder theories suggest that Ramses wasn't just being a romantic. He might have been acknowledging that Nefertari was the actual source of his divine right to rule. There are whispers among alternative historians that Nefertari belonged to a bloodline that the Egyptians considered stellar, or not of this earth. By carving her at the same scale as himself, Ramses might have been signaling to future generations that she was the true power behind the throne, or perhaps even a co-deity whose energy was required to keep the empire from collapsing. The level of public affection Ramses showed for her was unheard of. He had an inscription carved that said she was the one for whom the sun shines. This is more than just a poetic compliment. If we look at the way the temple is aligned, things get even stranger. Twice a year, the sun aligns perfectly with the inner sanctum of the main temple, illuminating the statues of the gods deep inside. Some theorists believe this wasn't just a calendar trick. They argue the temples were part of a massive, mountain-sized energy machine. According to this theory, the temples were built over a powerful ley line, and the sun's light acted as a key that activated a frequency within the rock. If Ramses and Nefertari were equal in stone, perhaps they were equal in this ritual, acting as the positive and negative poles of a cosmic battery meant to ensure eternal life. This changes everything we thought we knew about power in the ancient world. We used to think women were just in the background, confined to the harem or the domestic sphere, but Nefertari proves that a woman could reach the highest level of authority without even having a royal bloodline of her own. She was a self-made leader who used her brain to stay at the top for over 25 years. She was a master diplomat who wrote letters to the Queen of the Hittites to secure a peace treaty that ended decades of war. Some say her diplomatic skills were so advanced they bordered on the supernatural, as if she could influence the minds of her enemies from thousands of miles away. When she finally passed away, the light seemed to go out for Ramses. He lived for many more years, outliving many of his children and several other wives, but he never built anything quite as beautiful as the things he made for her. The Valley of the Queens holds her tomb, QV 66, which is often called the Sistine Chapel of ancient Egypt. The walls are covered in vibrant, stunning paintings that look like they were finished yesterday. But look closer at the imagery. There are stars everywhere, thousands of them painted on the ceiling. Some ancient astronaut theorists suggest these aren't just decorations, but a star map showing where Nefertari's soul was actually supposed to go. They argue that the complexity of the math required to build these structures and the precision of the tomb's artwork suggests the use of technology we still don't fully understand. The recent identification of her mummified legs is the final piece of this story. For a long time, we only had the legends, but finding her physical remains takes her out of the world of myths and puts her back into the world of real people. We can now say for sure that this woman existed, that she was tall and strong, and that she was treated with a level of respect that most kings would be jealous of. But even the legs tell a story. Forensic analysis suggests she was around 40 to 50 years old when she died. But her bones show signs of someone who lived a life of incredible luxury, and perhaps someone who had access to medicinal knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet. There's even a wild theory that her legs were found separated from the rest of her body because her tomb was intentionally sabotaged to prevent her from using the star map to return. So, here's the deal. When we look at the ruins of ancient Egypt, we should not just see the kings with their big egos and their war chariots. We need to look at the women like Nefertari who were doing the hard work of running the empire and maintaining the cosmic balance behind the scenes. Her story is a reminder that power does not always have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one who is calm, smart, and knows how to play the game better than anyone else. Nefertari played the game of life and death, and 3,000 years later, she is still winning. Think about the relocation of Abu Simbel in the 1960s. When the Aswan High Dam was built, the entire mountain had to be cut into pieces and moved to higher ground to save it from the rising Nile. Engineers from all over the world gathered to pull off this miracle. But here's the kicker. Even with all our modern computers and laser levels, we couldn't perfectly replicate what the ancients did. The solar alignment is now one day off from its original schedule. Some people think this was a deliberate curse or a failsafe built into the temple's design, that once it was moved from its original geological power spot, its magic was partially broken. Nefertari has finally stepped out of the shadows and taken her place as one of the greatest leaders in history. She wasn't just a queen. She was an architect of peace, a goddess on earth, and perhaps a keeper of secrets that we are only just beginning to decode. Whether she was a master politician or a figure of cosmic significance, one thing is certain: the sun still shines for her. Could Nefertari have been the one actually running Egypt while Ramses took all the credit? It is a question that makes us rethink everything we know about the past. What do you think her secret was? Let us know in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more mysteries.